At her grandson Ethan's upscale wedding, 67-year-old Martha Bennett looks radiant in her late husband George's favorite lilac dress, hoping to honor his memory on this joyful day. But when she picks up her name tag at the reception, she freezes. It reads, "The old lady who's footing the bill." What was meant to be a celebration turns into a revelation. Martha overhears snide remarks and realizes her family sees her as nothing more than a checkbook. The final straw comes when her son Paul refers to her as our family sponsor, while introducing her to old business contacts. Humiliated but poised, Martha meets George's old lawyer, who discreetly hands her a sealed letter, George's secret amendment to his will to be used only if his descendants ever publicly disrespected her. Martha quietly reads the clause that would disinherit any family member who humiliates her. For the first time, she sees her family clearly and knows exactly what to do next. Martha hadn't expected to feel this alone. The morning had started with hope, nostalgia even. She'd run her hands over the smooth fabric of her lilac dress, remembered George calling her his spring flower, and took her time styling her silver curls. The church ceremony had been beautiful, filled with white lilies and soft piano music. Ethan had looked dashing in his navy suit, and his bride, Lily, glowed with joy. For a moment, surrounded by whispers of congratulations and organ chords, Martha let herself believe her family was still whole. That illusion shattered the moment she stepped into the Westmont ballroom. At the guest table, a young woman with too much lip gloss handed Martha a name tag with a grin. "Here you go, Mrs. Bennett. You're going to love your table." Martha glanced down and saw the insult etched in elegant script, "The old lady who's footing the bill." She blinked. Surely this was a joke, a bad one. "Excuse me," she said, voice soft but firm. "I believe there's been a mistake." The girl's smile faltered. "Oh, let me check." She shuffled the cards, but found no alternative. "I think that's the only one we printed for you, rather than cause a scene." Martha nodded slowly. "I'll speak with my son." She pinned the tag on with trembling fingers and walked inside. The chandelier lights were dazzling, but the heat rising in Martha's chest was hotter than any spotlight. She passed tables filled with laughing guests, faces familiar and not. Some looked away quickly, pretending not to notice the words on her chest. Others whispered behind champagne flutes. She tried to focus on the flowers, the cake, the music, but it was like trying to tune out static in her ears. Near the bar, she caught a snippet of conversation. "Did you see her tag?" Someone giggled. "I heard Dana thought it would be hilarious. She's basically their walking ATM." Martha's throat clenched. She turned just in time to see Paul waving her over. "Mom, come meet the Lamberts. Dad used to talk about golf with Tom." Martha walked stiffly toward the group. Paul put his arm around her and chuckled. "This is our family's patron saint, Martha, the magnificent financier of dreams." There were polite chuckles. Martha's smile never reached her eyes. She shook hands with Tom and Linda Lambert, forcing herself to stay upright. As the Lamberts drifted away, Martha tugged Paul aside. "Why did my name tag say that?" Paul grinned like a teenager caught mid-prank. "Lighten up, Mom. It's just a joke. Everyone knows you made this wedding possible." "It's humiliating," she said. "Oh, come on. You're the one who insists on being generous." Before she could answer, Dana appeared swishing in her designer gown. "There you are. We want everyone to know who's behind this gorgeous night. Think of it as a tribute, Martha." She couldn't speak. She excused herself and escaped toward the restroom. But halfway there, a man stepped into her path. "Martha," he asked gently. She looked up startled. "It's me, David Langston, George's lawyer." She remembered him well, soft-spoken, sharp-eyed. He held out an envelope. "George asked me to give this to you only if today ever happened." Her fingers trembled as she took it. In a side hallway, she cracked the seal. Inside was a single clause: any descendant who publicly disrespected her would be disinherited. George had seen this coming. Her chest ached with emotion, but not grief. Clarity. The ballroom behind her pulsed with laughter and music. But Martha stood in silence, her name tag still on her next steps, already forming in her mind. The morning after the wedding, Martha sat at her dining table in her floral robe, the offensive name tag propped against a crystal vase. The script still shimmered, the old lady. Who's footing the bill? It caught the light like a cruel joke. Around her the house was quiet, save for the ticking of the old wall clock George had insisted on keeping, despite its chime being slightly offbeat. She wrapped her hands around her teacup and stared into the steam. The shame had passed. What lingered now was something colder resolve. After breakfast, she brought out a shoebox labeled simply statements. It had been sitting in the closet beneath the coats for years. George used to keep track of everything down to the penny. Martha had taken over the bills after he passed, but never questioned the favors her son Paul and Dana asked of her. Now she would. On the living room floor, sunlight creeping in through the half-closed blinds, Martha began her review, one envelope at a time. She opened old bank statements, scanned check images, and compiled a handwritten list in a yellow legal pad. Renovation support for Paul's kitchen, $38,000. College tuition help for the twins, $54,000. A surprise trip to the Bahamas for Dana's birthday, $12,500. Then there were the new cars, the private school contributions, the emergency loan for their HVAC system that had somehow morphed into a spa installation. By noon, she was at $246,000. By 3 p.m., the number had crossed $300,000. She sat back, the pen falling from her hand. Her lap was covered in old receipts. And it wasn't just the money. It was the expectation. The assumption that her savings, her retirement, her quiet life didn't matter because she wasn't doing anything with it. Her house would be next. The doorbell rang. Martha wasn't in the mood for more surprises, but when she looked through the peephole, her heart softened. It was Alex, her grandson, Paul's son, 22 tall, with George's steady eyes and a hint of awkwardness in his lanky frame. "Hi, Grandma," he said as she opened the door. She gave him a tired smile. "Alex, I didn't expect company today." "I know, I needed to see you. After yesterday." He followed her into the kitchen where she poured him tea from the same pot she'd reheated 3 times. He sat down and rubbed the back of his neck. "I wanted to say I'm sorry," he began. "About the name tag, the jokes, the way everyone was talking about you like I was the party's ATM," she offered, voice low. Alex nodded, eyes full of shame. "I didn't laugh. But I didn't say anything either. I should have. You're young, but you noticed. That matters more than you think." He looked down. "There's something else, and I think you deserve to know." Martha set her cup down. "Dad and Dana, they've been talking about trying to convince you to sell the house. Move into a place called Rosewood Trails. It's like a retirement condo thing." She stayed still, listening. "They said you don't need all this space, that they could help you manage the proceeds. Invest for your future," they said. "But mostly, I think they want the money and the house." Dad kept saying, "She's sitting on equity. We can help her unlock it." Martha's lips pressed into a thin line. Alex rushed on. "I know it's not right. I told them they were being pushy. They said I didn't understand responsibility. But it's not responsibility, it's control." Martha stood and walked to the window. Her garden, slightly overgrown but still colorful, danced in the afternoon breeze. George had planted the azaleas himself. They were blooming early this year. She turned back to Alex. "Thank you for telling me. I'm just tired of watching them treat you like some kind of resource." "Well, she said you're not the only one who's woken up." She led him to the living room and showed him the stacks of papers and receipts. "I have been documenting everything. Every dollar I gave them. Every promise made and broken." Alex looked stunned. "It's all right here. It is. And now I think it's time I make a few promises of my own." Sunday morning brought with it a cold wind and a hot ache in Martha's chest. She'd debated not going. The invitation from Paul and Dana had arrived 2 days before the wedding, an elegant card printed with gold foil announcing a casual celebratory brunch for family and close friends. She already knew the setting, the Brookline Country Club, their newest brag. The kind of place that served cucumber water in crystal pitchers and judged you if your shoes didn't shine. But curiosity had a sharp edge. She needed to see if the wedding insult had been a one-off or a pattern. So she dressed deliberately, a crisp, cream pantsuit. George had once said, made her look like she owned the room. She applied a bit of blush, fixed her pearl earrings, and drove herself, letting the silence of the car calm her nerves. The brunch was held in the garden room, a glass-walled hall overlooking manicured greens and hedges cut into the shapes of swans. Inside, laughter bounced off the high ceilings. Martha spotted Ethan and Lily seated near the fireplace, looking sleep-deprived but happy. She was barely in the door when Paul spotted her and waved. "Mom," he called, drawing the syllable out. Right here at the head table, Dana stood beside him in a blush-pink wrap dress, drink already in hand. "Alice, you look nice," she said, her tone making nice sound like an insult. She offered the kind of air kiss that never touched skin. Martha took her seat between Mark's parent strangers and smiled politely. No one asked where she wanted to sit. Plates of smoked salmon quiches and fruit were served. People gossiped, posed for photos, clinked glasses. Dana stood, tapped her champagne flute, and flashed a dazzling grin. "Good morning, everyone. First, thank you for joining us as we bask in the afterglow of Ethan and Lily's beautiful wedding." Applause rippled. Dana raised her glass. "And of course, a very special thanks to the woman who made it all possible." Grandma Martha heads turned toward her. Martha smiled faintly, feeling the heat crawl up her neck. Dana wasn't done, and we're thrilled to announce that thanks to Grandma Martha's incredible generosity, Ethan and Lily will be honeymooning in beautiful Greece. The applause that followed was loud or enthusiastic. Cameras flashed. Ethan looked confused, but grateful. Lily mouthed, "Thank you," across the room. Martha slowly set her fork down. The clapping faded, but the tension did not. She stood smoothing her jacket. "I'm sorry, Dana," she said gently, "but I wasn't aware I had agreed to fund a trip to Greece." A hush fell, like a dropped curtain. Dana blinked, her smile cracking. "What? Oh, we talked about it yesterday. You said you'd think about it." "I did, and I'm still thinking." Paul leaned forward, his voice low but sharp. "Mom, don't make a scene." Martha turned to him. "Is it a scene to correct a lie?" A fork clinked as someone dropped it. Dana's face had turned a blotchy red. "We just assumed," Dana muttered. "I imagine you've assumed a lot," Martha said calmly. "But from now on, it's best to ask." She picked up her napkin, dabbed her lips, and folded it neatly on her plate. Paul was seething. "Mom, you're embarrassing us." "No, Paul," she said, eyes locking with his. "You've embarrassed yourselves." She stepped away from the table. Alex stood quickly. "I'll walk you out." As they exited, conversations resumed and whispers scattered and brittle. Martha didn't look back. Out in the parking lot, she exhaled like she hadn't breathed all morning. "You okay?" Alex asked. "I am," she replied, her voice steady. For the first time in a long while. They walked side by side toward her car. The wind tugged at her jacket, but she barely noticed. Her mind was already in motion. She was done waiting for their approval, done playing the good soldier. She hadn't shouted or thrown a drink. She hadn't made a scene. But her refusal to stay quiet had said more than any confrontation ever could. Inside that glass-walled room, she'd been dismissed as irrelevant. Outside in the open air, she'd reclaimed herself. Later that afternoon, after the brunch spectacle, Martha sat on the back porch with Alex, sipping tea from her grandmother's china set. The sun filtered through the trees, casting dappled shadows on the wood planks. For the first time in days, the weight on her chest felt just a little lighter. Alex leaned forward. That was, well, a lot. You handled it better than I would have. Martha offered a small smile. I've learned that silence can be stronger than shouting if used wisely. They watched the breeze play through the azaleas for a while, before she stood and returned with a white envelope. She placed it on the small table between them. What's that? Alex asked. It's something George left behind. Something I wasn't supposed to see unless things got bad. Alex hesitated, then picked up the envelope. He recognized the heavy parchment, instantly legal. Inside was a single-page amendment to George's will. Martha explained as he read. It's a conditional clause. George instructed his lawyer to disinherit any descendant who publicly disrespected me, whether through humiliation, manipulation, or coercion. He called it a respect safeguard. Alex looked up, shocked. He did this for you. He saw what I refused to see, she said softly. He knew what Paul and Dana were becoming, and he wanted to make sure I wouldn't be left powerless. Alex leaned back, letting the weight of the revelation settle. That explains a lot. Martha folded her hands in her lap. I haven't invoked it. Not yet. I'm not interested in revenge, Alex. I just want peace. And maybe a little dignity. He nodded slowly. You deserve that. More than they ever gave you credit for. That evening, Martha did something she hadn't done in years. She pulled out her old sketchbooks. Pages filled with delicate charcoal drawings and watercolor studies of flowers, buildings, even people. She used to dream of opening a small art gallery cafe. She and George had talked about it in their early retirement years, but life had swept them into caregiving and then into grief. Now, as she flipped through the worn pages, another idea began to form. The next week, she called Alex. Do you still want to open that art cafe you talked about? He hesitated. Of course, but it's just a dream. I don't have the funds to even get started. Well, she said, I've been doing some reading on small business grants, and I think it's time I made a real investment in someone who actually appreciates it. He was stunned into silence. You mean it? He asked, finally. Yes, she said with a quiet smile. But on one condition, it has to serve the best coffee in the county. They laughed together. And just like that, Martha began to live for something again, not to be needed, but to be inspired. In the weeks that followed, she reconnected with old friends she hadn't seen in years. She invited Elaine for lunch, joined a watercolor class at the community center, and took long walks through the park where George used to bring their grandkids. Her schedule, filled with people and activities that filled her, not drained her. The calls from Dana started up again around week 3. Hi, Martha, Dana said with that syrupy voice that always accompanied a request. We were wondering if you could help us out. The twins are planning to study abroad next semester, and the expenses. Well, they're just piling up. Martha smiled into the phone. I hope they have a wonderful experience, Dana. But I've already made some financial commitments elsewhere. There was a pause. Elsewhere? Yes, she said gently but firmly. Alex is working on something special, and I've decided to support that project. Dana's tone hardened. I just think it's odd you're suddenly so interested in business investments at your age. Martha didn't flinch. Maybe I've finally learned the value of investing in people who give as much as they take. I see, Dana muttered. I hope so, Martha replied, then ended the call with a calm, steady hand. Later that evening, Martha sat at her kitchen table, sketching the preliminary sign design for Alex's cafe. The lettering curled with elegance, framing a painted mug and paintbrush. Outside, the wind had picked up. Leaves danced across the porch, but inside the house felt steady, no longer. Just a structure filled with obligation and regret. It was hers again, and so was her life. Martha's 68th birthday dawned crisp and bright sunlight dancing through the blinds of her kitchen. She moved with purpose, setting out teacups, slicing strawberries, arranging a platter of smoked salmon and rye toast. The house smelled of lemon zest and lavender from a new candle she'd bought. Small things, but they made her feel alive again. Michael, her grandson, had insisted on hosting a family dinner in her honor. It's time they all see who's really in charge, he'd said, flashing a grin that reminded her so much of George it nearly stole her breath. She hadn't planned anything dramatic, just a quiet meal among those who still claimed to care. By 5 o'clock, the guests began to arrive. Jennifer and Lily, warm and gracious. A few of George's old friends from his bridge club. And right on time, Paul and Dana, carrying a generic bouquet and a bottle of wine that still had the clearance tag on it. "Happy birthday, Mom," Paul said with an exaggerated smile. "You look great," Dana added, her eyes scanning Martha's outfit, a tailored navy dress with a sapphire brooch George had given her on their 25th anniversary. "You've really perked up lately." "Thank you," Martha replied, accepting the flowers without fuss. They moved into the dining room where the table was set with heirloom china and crystal goblets. The conversation started pleasantly enough, full of polite laughter and compliments on the food. Martha played the role she'd known all her life, the composed hostess, the glue holding the family together. But halfway through dessert, as she was pouring coffee, Paul cleared his throat and stood. "There's something Dana and I would like to bring up," he began. "We've been concerned about Mom's well-being." The table stilled. Martha didn't flinch. She knew this was coming. Paul continued, "We've noticed some signs: erratic decisions, unusual spending patterns, isolating behavior." Dana nodded solemnly. "And at your age, Martha, it's important to think about safety and long-term security." Paul's voice took on a faux reasonable tone. "That's why we believe it's time to consider establishing power of attorney, just to make sure everything is handled responsibly." You could have heard a pin drop. Then, from the far end of the table, David Langston, the family lawyer, and George's longtime friend, set down his cup with a soft clink. "Paul," David said, his voice calm, but cutting. "Are you suggesting your mother is mentally incompetent?" Paul stammered, caught off guard. "I'm saying she's acting irrationally. She's investing in a failing business model. She cut off her family support. And she's letting herself live," David interrupted smoothly. "And none of what you described qualifies as diminished capacity. I should know, I've spoken with her frequently. She's never been sharper." Dana's face turned pale. "This isn't personal, David. We're just looking out for her." "No," David said, standing slowly. "You're looking out for her money." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a familiar white envelope, the same envelope Martha had shown Alex weeks ago. "I had hoped this would never be necessary," he said, his gaze sweeping the table. But George Bennett anticipated this very moment. He opened the document with deliberate care. "This is a conditional clause to George's will, added shortly before his death. It clearly states that any descendant who publicly disrespects or attempts to manipulate Martha Bennett will forfeit their inheritance." Gasps echoed around the room. Dana's fork clattered to her plate. Paul looked like he'd been slapped. "This is absurd," Paul snapped. "Dad would never have." "He did," David said evenly. "And I've documented your behavior, the name tag at Ethan's wedding, the brunch announcement, your repeated attempts to control her finances. All of it. On her birthday, no less." Martha finally stood, her voice calm and resolute. "Paul, Dana, this was your choice, not mine. You made it when you decided to see me as a wallet instead of a mother." "You can't be serious," Dana whispered, eyes wide with panic. "I've never been more serious," Martha said. Jennifer and Lily stared, mouths open. Michael sat back in his chair, arms folded in quiet support. Paul's face darkened. "So you're cutting us off, just like that?" "No," Martha replied. "You did that to yourselves." Paul's chair scraped violently against the floor as he stood, face flushed, crimson fists clenched at his sides. "So this is it," he barked. "After everything we've done for you, you repay us by humiliating us in front of the entire family." Martha remained calm, standing tall in her modest heels, a quiet steel in her spine. "Done for me," she echoed. "Paul, you've taken. That's all you've ever done: renovations, tuition trips. Did you ever once ask if I was okay? If I wanted to spend my retirement years handing out checks like some kind of personal banker?" Dana stood beside him, voice trembling but still polished. "Martha, you're misunderstanding. We only ever wanted to help." Help, Martha cut in her voice, still soft but sharper now. "By lying at brunch, by making decisions about my house, my money, my life behind my back." Paul stepped forward, jaw twitching. "You've clearly been manipulated, Alex. David feeding you paranoid thoughts, turning you against your own family." Alex rose slowly from his seat. "I haven't turned her against anyone, Dad. She saw what you were doing on her own. You treated her like a burden wrapped in a wallet. You ungrateful little." Paul started, but David Langston held up a hand. "Paul, stop," the lawyer said firmly. "You're only digging deeper." Dana tried again, her voice laced with practiced sincerity. "Martha, maybe we didn't handle things perfectly, but this punishment, it's too severe. You're upset, we understand, but surely we can move past this." Martha looked at her daughter-in-law, always polished, always scheming beneath the smile, and saw the same pattern she'd lived through for years, a facade of concern designed to mask control. "No," Martha said. "We cannot move past this, because I am not moving backward anymore." The silence around the table deepened. Even the air felt heavier. "For too long I let guilt and grief convince me to say yes," she continued. "Yes to checks. Yes to silence. Yes to treatment no mother should accept from her children. But today I say no. No more justifying your entitlement. No more funding your lifestyle. And no more pretending that this family dynamic is anything but toxic." Paul's hands shook. "So what, you just cut us off over one dinner?" "It's not one dinner," Martha snapped, and for the first time her voice cracked, not with weakness, but with long restrained truth. "It's years. Years of being called the old lady who pays for everything. Years of being used, dismissed, laughed at behind my back. That name tag wasn't a joke. It was the headline to a story you've been writing for years." I just finally opened my eyes. Dana's composure broke. Her lips trembled as she looked around the room, hoping for an ally. But no one spoke. Even Jennifer, who had once mirrored her mother's pride, now looked away in shame. "We were just trying to keep the family comfortable," Dana whispered. "You mean yourselves," Martha replied. "You used family like a coupon code, guilt-tripping me into giving more every time you felt entitled to something new." Paul turned to David, eyes wild. "This can't be legal. This clause. Dad wouldn't have signed something like this. You forged it." David didn't flinch. "It's signed, notarized, and filed. George knew who he was dealing with. That did it." Paul's voice rose to a near shout. "You think this makes you noble, Mom? You've turned your back on your blood. You're throwing away everything for what, some art project with Alex? Some fantasy about painting and coffee shops?" Alex stood his ground. "It's not fantasy, Dad, it's real. It's honest. And unlike you, I never treated Grandma like she owed me anything." Paul scoffed. "You're just playing the favorite, leeching off her, now like you accuse us of doing." "That's enough," Martha snapped, eyes blazing. Everyone stopped. Even the air seemed to freeze. "I'm not throwing away anything, I'm reclaiming it. My time, my home, my peace. You don't get to control the rest of my life because you feel cheated out of a future that was never promised to you." Paul looked at her like he didn't recognize the woman standing there. "This is pathetic," he muttered, grabbing his coat. "You'll regret this, Mom." "No," she said, meeting his eyes one last time. "I've already regretted the years I let you treat me like less than a person. But this is the beginning of me not regretting anything." With that, Paul turned on his heel, Dana close behind her, silence more telling than any parting word. The front door slammed shut, vibrating through the house. In the hush that followed, no one spoke for a long moment. Then Michael let out a slow breath. "You were amazing, Grandma," Martha exhaled. For the first time in years, she believed it. The days that followed Paul and Dana's explosive exit were eerily quiet, almost unnaturally so. Martha had always assumed peace would feel like relief. Instead, it came wrapped in silence, broken only by the creak of floorboards and the occasional birdsong outside her kitchen window. But the silence wasn't empty. It was space. Space to think, to breathe, to begin again. Alex stopped by the next morning, carrying fresh bagels and a proud smile. "You slept?" he asked, setting the bag down and eyeing her with cautious optimism. "Like a rock," Martha said, pouring them both a mug of tea. "I think I've been waiting years to say those words." He nodded but then hesitated. "Are you okay? I mean, really?" She sat across from him and reached for his hand. "I'm better than okay. I feel clean, like I washed off years of other people's expectations." Alex smiled, but his eyes were clouded with concern. "They'll come back, Paul and Dana. They'll find another angle." "I know," she said simply. "But now I'll be ready." That week, Martha began to rebuild, not her house, not her finances, but her sense of self. She reopened the long, ignored portfolio of watercolor pieces she had tucked away after George passed. The strokes were a little shaky at first, but her confidence grew with every petal, every shoreline, every play of light and shadow she committed to paper. She started volunteering twice a week at the Community Art Center, guiding children through messy acrylic sessions and showing older adults how to mix color without fear. One afternoon, while leading a beginner's class on painting with natural light, a woman tapped her shoulder. "I thought that was you," the woman said. "Eleanor from the Bridge Club. I haven't seen you in ages." Martha turned, and the two women embraced like war buddies, returning from different fronts. "You look 10 years younger," Eleanor whispered. "Feels like it too," Martha replied. Meanwhile, Alex's cafe dream began taking shape. With a small business loan and Martha's seed money, they secured a storefront downtown. Martha helped design the signage, a stylized brushstroke shaped like a steaming coffee cup, and sketched a mural concept for the back wall. They called it Canvas and Coffee. He worked tirelessly, juggling permits, contractors, and suppliers, but always made time to stop by Martha's house for dinner. The rhythm of their conversations became a balm, the laughter a fresh coat of paint over old wounds. One afternoon, a knock came at the door. Martha opened it to find Jennifer standing nervously on the porch, Lily beside her holding a bouquet of daisies. "Hi, Grandma," Jennifer said quietly. "We were hoping we could talk." Martha stepped aside, not smiling, but not closing the door either. In the kitchen, the air was thick with unspoken things. Jennifer twisted her hands. "I should have said something at the wedding. About the name tag. About all of it." Martha stirred her tea. "You were quiet when it mattered. But you're here now. That's something." Jennifer looked down ashamed. "Mom says I'm being ungrateful for even coming here." "That doesn't surprise me." Lily reached across the table. "We're not asking for anything. We just wanted to make things right. On our own." Martha studied them both. She saw uncertainty, remorse, but also sincerity. Jennifer's confidence, always wrapped up in her mother's approval, was slowly untangling. "I don't expect overnight transformation," Martha said at last. "But if you're willing to show up without strings, I'll meet you there." Jennifer's eyes welled up, but she nodded. "We'd like that." They talked a while longer about the baby Jennifer, and Lily hoped to adopt next year, about the struggles of starting their life without family support. Martha listened, cautious but open. It wasn't reconciliation yet, but it was something softer possibility. That night, she sat at her easel, painting a sunset over a winding path. Not a destination, just a direction. She titled it New Roots. For the first time in decades, she didn't feel like she was holding her breath, waiting for someone else to decide how her life should look. Now she was painting it herself. The scent of fresh espresso and baked cinnamon lingered in the air as sunlight streamed through the tall bay windows of Canvas and Coffee. It was the grand opening, 1 year to the day since Martha Bennett had taken back her life. The once dilapidated Victorian house now stood proud and inviting, trimmed in sage green with gold lettering above the door. A soft bell chimed each time a customer entered, followed by murmurs of admiration and laughter from inside. Martha stood just inside the entrance, taking it all in. Children giggled in the corner beneath the sprawling forest mural she had painted. Her whimsical vision of talking trees and secret animals had become the cafe's signature. Twice a week she led story time there, reading from books both classic and curious. Her voice a comforting cadence to tiny ears and curious minds. "Grandma," a familiar voice called. Martha turned as Lily entered, her cheeks flushed and her smile wide. In her arms, she carried a bundled newborn wrapped in a yellow blanket. Jennifer followed close behind, her face soft with sleep-deprived joy. She wanted to see her great-grandmother's mural, Lily said as she approached. Martha stepped closer, eyes misting. "Is this little Georgette Rose?" Jennifer said proudly, after Grandpa George. Martha bent to kiss the baby's forehead, her heart full. He would have been honored. Their relationship had grown steadily over the past year, slow, careful, and honest. Jennifer had worked to mend the damage of her silence, never demanding forgiveness, only earning trust. Lily's gentle steadiness helped. Together, they showed up in ways Paul and Dana never had, without expectation, without strings. They stayed for coffee, settling at one of the cozy window seats. Across the room, Alex buzzed between tables, greeting customers, checking on staff, and occasionally stealing glances at his grandmother to make sure she saw it all. And she did. She saw the dream that had once been scribbles in a notebook now come to life. She saw the joy in the faces of guests admiring local art lining the walls. She saw a future made not from obligation, but from authenticity. Alex caught her gaze from across the room and raised his mug in a toast. She lifted hers in return. Later that afternoon, after the crowds had thinned, Martha walked through the side hallway where Alex had hung framed photos of the cafe's journey, the before pictures of the house construction shots the day the mural was finished, and one candid photo of her holding a paintbrush laughing. She stopped before it, remembering the moment. Behind her, Alex approached. "You okay?" She turned to him, smiling. "I'm more than okay. I'm proud of you, of this, of everything we've built." He slipped an arm around her shoulder. "Couldn't have done it without you." "No," she said thoughtfully, "but I think George always knew you'd be the one to carry something real forward. He saw it in you before either of us did. I hope I've made him proud. You have." They returned to the main room where warm light bathed the space and laughter echoed gently beneath soft jazz playing overhead. Martha found her favorite chair beneath the mural, a high-backed seat by the fireplace, next to a side table stacked with art books and flower arrangements from local gardeners. Her coffee was still warm. Her world, once filled with noise and need, had quieted into something sacred. Paul and Dana hadn't called in months. After a few hollow apologies and legal bluffs, they'd faded into silence, first by choice, then by Martha's own. The only updates she received came filtered through Jennifer, a new condo in Florida, a job change, an occasional grumble about being cut out. Martha felt no anger, only distance and peace. She had rewritten her will last fall with David's guidance. No longer an inheritance defined by blood and expectation, it now honored respect, integrity, and love. Alex would inherit the house and the remaining estate. Jennifer and Lily would receive support to raise Georgette, and the rest would go to charities George and Martha had once dreamed of helping, back when dreams were free of burden. As she sipped her coffee, a toddler toddled over with a crayon drawing of the mural. "This is you, Miss Martha," the little girl said proudly, pointing to a small figure at the base of a painted tree. Martha looked at the stick figure with silver hair and a smile. "I love it," she said softly. "That's exactly who I am." And she knew without doubt this was the most beautiful chapter of her life.